Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Complete Tech Heads with me, Tom Edwards. This week, I am joined by Karoliina Torttila, the Director of Artificial Intelligence at Trimble. She leads the company's efforts on AI and machine learning in the construction and architecture spaces. So I am very, very excited to have her on. I think there's lots of super interesting things that we can discuss. So, Karoliina, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thank you for the invitation, Tom. I'm very, very good and happy to talk about my favorite topic, as always.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, look, first question. Are we always going to be able to tell what's real in the same way that we can now? Or can you ever see a point in time where we literally don't know the difference?
Yeah, I feel like we're already flirting with that, aren't we? A little bit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
both with the type of content that we see online and the type of text that we see coming from chatbots these days. So yeah, maybe the boundaries between reality and our imaginations are blurring.
Yeah. Um, I definitely think that we're getting there. Like when you look at, just old computer games,
Yeah,
and then you look at the most up to date ones now, it's just like we can't be far off. I think you'll be relying on other senses. Is my like you'll be relying on because you won't be able to feel the wind or whatever, so you'll know that you're not in anywhere else. But I think the photorealism is just going to be insane. So
agreed.
like how do you think AI is like on a macro level?
Yeah.
Like how is it impacting design? Is it like at every single level? Are there any particular areas in your world in construction and architecture particularly
Yeah.
where it's especially useful, or is it just everywhere now?
Yeah, I do think there's many facets to this, but at its core, I do think about design as this process of understanding what is and what could be, or perhaps what should be. And in crafting that vision of what should be, design ideation and concept exploration, of course, is an area that AI has fundamentally changed at this point. Especially in the context of this rapid experimentation across this infinite space of design possibilities. So, granted, in many cases, this is still somewhat surface level with AI generated images and video and so forth.
Mm,
It's very different to have a picture of a house than something that you can actually go and build now.
right.
Um, but if we look at design more liberally, I do think we have great examples in other spaces, such as DeepMind's AlphaFold for predicting protein structures and through
Mm,
that designing drugs, for example, or NVIDIA's chip design, where there is no single GPU chip that NVIDIA sells that was not designed with at least one or more AI models in play. So it's not too far off in the future, I think, to expect a world where the design process of every major building will have some AI in the mix.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a guy called Rodrigo Young who has a business called Samba Nova. They're building chips. They're not GPUs, but they're similar. They're designed specifically for AI. And he was talking about TSMC, which is the Taiwanese. I'm sure you know the semiconductor manufacturers. For listeners, it's like the only business in the world that can build these incredible chips. And he was comparing it to building a city, building a chip, because it has so many billions of components. He said it's like imagine your own house and how many components are in your house. If you count every screw and every nail, well, there are like infinitely more inside this tiny little chip, right? So it's like these questions of scale can really start to blow your mind after a while, right? So
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And this level of performance, you cannot reach it by humans calculating whatnot. It's just we cannot reach it without AI. So even if you think about a hospital building, right? Sure,
yeah,
it's not a GPU chip, but there's many, many different pieces and
yeah.
decisions to be made around that. So I think the parallels are there.
So do you think? like when we really fully adopt, because it's so early, right?
Yeah,
That people like you and I have probably been talking about this stuff for years, but for most people, it still is very early.
yeah.
When we fully adopt AI into all of the processes around architecture, building design, a building's going to get like infinitely more complicated and ambitious, and just like like, are we finally going to get? Do you know that meme
Yeah.
of like the space age city? Like, are we going to get that?
Well, I think it's an interesting one because right now modern buildings are pretty boxy, right? They can be quite darn boring, right? So it's an interesting aspect to, can AI allow for designs that are both personalized and kind of customized as well as efficient to build? And that's an area where I know in the UK, for example, design for manufacturing and assembly is a big topic. So this
Mm,
looks at designs not just from an aesthetic perspective or not just from the usage perspective, but already in the design phase, thinking through what are the materials, what are the supply chains, how are these different components installed on site in a cost-effective manner. And it's an interesting one, or kind of thought experiment to think through, if we really optimize not only for the design itself but also for the execution,
mm,
how much variety, more variety could we have in buildings
yeah,
down the line?
yeah. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, so the you'll eventually have AI agents running the logistics of a construction project as well,
exactly,
like a
exactly. and,
project
and
manager.
also, a lot of construction is not just new construction. So a lot of construction is retrofit, and that involves understanding your current as built, understanding your current state of your construction. So that's where AI plays a big role in processing reality capture data like images and laser scans and so forth, to even create that design starting point so that you can start to add your additions and changes.
Right. Yeah. And I guess with really old buildings, you've got to infer lots of information that maybe you don't know for sure, right? Which is something that AIs are extremely good at.
Yes, yes, exactly. And especially when the position, the where that building exists, the time period it comes from. We can make our best bets on what is beneath the floors or what is within the walls based on those.
Yeah. So where are you deploying AI? Like, what's the most like what where's it showing the most use right now
Yeah.
for you?
In the design space, I'm quite honestly looking at two pieces of this, and one is this more of this concept exploration, and a lot of the AI that we put out into the world is with our SketchUp portfolio. So we can do things ranging from you sketching on your iPad and that becoming geometric shapes
Yeah, yeah.
on in SketchUp, for example, or creating these diffusion based renderings of your 3D model, right? To kind of take your design a little bit further. But then design is also a lot more than just figuring out the geometry of things. So design is also generating construction drawings, and design is also detailing. So if you're putting in your concrete elements, they need to have rebar in them as well. So there are these repetitive tasks that are part of the design process and are quite tedious. And that's
Right.
where you see a lot of kind of predictive AI plays.
Okay.
So we talk a lot about generative AI, and it's very exciting. Don't get me wrong, but there's also a lot of this repetitive action that can be automated by AI in the more tedious parts of the work.
Okay. Okay. And so in those cases then, what makes it AI
Yeah,
as opposed to just automation?
yeah. Um, it really comes from moving beyond rule based algorithms, right? And moving more
Right.
towards curating your example data set and letting the AI learn from that. So
Right.
so mostly these models are deep learning models. We don't try to articulate the complexity of the real world. We show the complexity of the real world. And
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
this is something that's fundamentally important for people to understand. Also, in areas where AI fails, we're talking about probabilities and probabilistic algorithms, and you're really never going to reach 100%. So understanding where AI is a good fit for automation and how much human oversight should be had, those are all questions that are certainly not just for a technology vendor to answer and try to solve, but for the industry more broadly.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine a world where you've just got all sorts of different agents that are just crawling all over your blueprint. I mean, do they probably don't call them blueprints anymore, do they? What do you,
Yeah,
what do you,
whatever you want to
well,
call it.
yeah, I don't know, like CAD, is AutoCAD old now as well? I don't know.
Old, but still in use
Still in
in
use. Okay,
few
good, good.
places. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
2D, 3D. Yeah,
I've done some work with construction tech
yeah,
companies in the past, but yeah, I'm certainly no expert. But yeah, anyway, you can imagine having all sorts of AI agents just crawling all over it, just
yeah,
touching things up, can't you? And I guess you would need them making decisions, right? Like that's does this bit of concrete need rebar in? Or, I mean, I don't know if every bit of concrete has rebar in or not, but I'd assume there might be some cases where it wouldn't,
yeah,
and you you would then have to confer some kind of decision making capabilities
yeah.
on these
And
agents as well, right?
yeah, and I like the kind of mental model that you're drawing there, because there are so many different sources of information and different tools in play when you design a building, for example. So you need to
Mm.
look at national regulations for how much concrete you might need to put in, right? You need to interact with your modeling software, and I think this kind of concept of AI agents crawling around and connecting to whatever source of data or whatever tool is needed for this specific bit is a very yeah, good way of looking at it.
Mm. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, so I mean, I think you've actually touched on an issue that's quite interesting more generally, which is AIs connecting to APIs, right? I presume most of the software that you use has APIs that you can, build your own tools around.
Yep.
Um, are you preparing? Is it your assumption that in the future, so APIs, I should probably just say for anyone who doesn't know, application programming interface, it's a way for computers to talk to each other, basically.
Yes.
Um, and so, are you preparing for a future where you've got AI agents that are talking to all the different APIs for all the different types of software that you're using on buildings?
Very, very much so, yeah, and
Yeah.
both for ourselves as well as for the larger developer community that develops on top of our our APIs, and so forth. A good example of how useful APIs can be is if you think about modeling software. So in our world, this can be anything from SketchUp to Tekla, which is more used for structural design and so forth. If you have APIs in place, you have a path to plugging on a large language model and starting to do your modeling of your geometry with using natural language, right? And
Yeah.
the benefits from something like this then mean that you don't have to learn all of the specific modeling tools. So, Tom, if you used AutoCAD in the past, now you don't have to learn something new, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how the logic of a specific tool works, but you could interact with things more on a natural language basis, or even through images and drawings or whatever the data modality is.
Yeah.
So that flexibility that APIs offer to add on AI to the mix is certainly an intriguing one.
Yeah. I mean, really, I think you're in an extremely interesting space because a lot of what we talk about with AI, I think, exists in like the digital world, right? Like we're interacting with it on a chatbot on a laptop, and it's amazing, and we're like, wow, this is incredible. Look at the picture it's just drawn, but we're just sitting in the same chair that we've been sitting in for our day job, and we're at a MacBook. I've still got a mouse. Like
Right.
it's all. My physical real world hasn't changed.
Yes.
I guess what you're doing is that you're introducing AI into the physical real world, which is like a whole nother level, right? Like, is that how you're feeling about it?
It
Excited?
it really is. It's so exciting, and there's so much opportunity there, and the benefits are very tangible and very meaningful, and this is a big reason of why I'm working in this space
Mm.
personally. Um, there's something interesting there where we've talked about a concept of digital twins, for example, for quite a long time, right? This concept
Yeah.
of you having a design and you having data from the physical reality and those always being in sync and aligned and so forth. Now, a big problem with the physical world component has been that when we capture data of the physical world, can be terabytes and terabytes of data, it is too much data for people to manually process. And this is especially true when we do things like laser scans or videos and these, large unstructured data types. And for the first time, we are now approaching this era where we have so much automation that AI offers for the processing of that field data that we can actually have an up-to-date or an alive digital twin that is in sync with the physical world.
Wow.
So we're so used to that data being stale. We're so used to us knowing, hey, where was that construction site a month ago? But it's really hard to act on information that's that stale. If it's a month old, a lot of things have already happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a really, really exciting part about the physical connection between the physical and the digital world right now.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So, and look, and I think that is really exciting, and I think it kind of touches. It kind of feels like, we have this idea of the metaverse, right? Which is something I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about, and it feels like you're kind of what you're describing is the physical world also almost becoming a metaverse, right? Like there's a digital twin of the whole world that you can kind of exist in real time. But presumably, if you mess something up in the metaverse, it doesn't really matter.
Right, right.
But but yeah. So like, what do you think about the metaverse generally? Is it just a slogan? Do you feel like there is going to be a metaverse that we all exist in at some point?
Yeah, I think it depends on whose definition of metaverse you go by.
Yeah, probably Mark Zuckerberg's. I guess we
Right,
we kind of have to now, don't we?
yeah, and if you look at how Meta talks about metaverse, of course they're looking at it through this lens of social connection, right? So they talk
Mm,
about virtual concerts and virtual meetings and all these type of things, and that's all great and whatnot. But I think NVIDIA's view of metaverse, which then aligns more with other industrial technology companies like Siemens and us as well, is yeah, just connects more, and that's because it's more around it is more around focus more on digital twins and physics simulation rather than the social interaction part of that.
mm.
So a core concept of metaverse for NVIDIA, for example, centers around something called USD. Are you familiar with that?
USD.
USD, yes, Universal Scene Descriptor.
I am not. No. Um,
So it's an interesting concept developed initially by Pixar, and this is a long time ago, but it's kind of
okay.
gotten a revival moment. And what a USD is, it's essentially a data format, but it's what a lot of the metaverse plays center around with NVIDIA. And how it differs from digital twins, as maybe more broadly seen in the construction industry, is our data tends to be more static. So we have design models that can be IFC models or Revit models by Autodesk or Trimble models by Trimble. There's all kinds of models there, right? But these are represent a design, for example, at a specific point in time, or we can have a scan that was taken at a specific point in time. Now, USD extends this reality to have a temporal aspect. So not only can you have a geometry and a snapshot of how an asset might be, but you can also do simulations on movement within that asset, how people or cars might move around in a city, and it's
Okay.
that dynamic nature that I think is more in the direction of metaverse that we're maybe all trying to wrap our heads around, and
Yeah.
that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I mean, yeah. I think it's the in my head. It's more like it's the it's the Ready Player One. Have you seen that
Right.
movie? Yeah, yeah. That's to me is like the metaverse, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
you strap in, you got your haptic suit on, and you're in it and you're flying around or whatever.
yeah,
That to me is like the metaverse. And I guess like it can be far more ambitious than the real world. I think what's exciting about it is that you can create a world where you can fly or whatever, and
yeah,
and like it just be more interesting and exciting than the real world, I guess. And I think
yeah,
we are probably getting there with gaming now. Like the only difference is the way that we interact with it. Most people still game with controllers. You know, there's MetaQuest obviously,
yeah.
but it doesn't really feel like we're like in Ready Player One yet to me.
In it,
But
yeah, yeah. But we can all see how we are getting there, to your point. It's
yeah,
not that it's that far away.
yeah.
And a lot of this tech I do think translates to these other domains, whether it's forestry or whether it's construction or something else, in a sense that maybe you're not battling, I don't know, fantasy characters, right? But you are figuring out, how is this darn building built, right? How do I do this thing? And there's some parallels there in world building and Minecraft maybe and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So I want to talk to you about generative AI. I know that generative AI is still in the early days and perhaps isn't super integrated, but I don't know, maybe it is. Are you using any generative models like diffusion models at the moment, and how are they working?
yeah. We are using a few different generative models, both on large language model side as well as these image generation models. Um, I think we were all very excited, right, when Stable Diffusion came out and this entire world of generative AI
Yeah.
just opened up to the general public. There had been curated examples, right, of DALI and GPT-2 and so forth before, but it had never really been this open to the public to interact with. Not to mention then open source with a lot of these models, where you can actually really get to understand what's going on behind the scenes,
Mm.
and how does this code work. Um, I think generative AI is relevant to almost every part of our technology portfolio, but there is quite a bit of work to do to ensure that we integrate it in the right way. And by that I mean, there is an aspect of generative AI where anybody who's ever spent some time experimenting with them, whether it's with text or images or video, I think notices how it's quite easy to get impressive results when you're running these open-ended experiments, right? You're just trying to do something. It's quite easy to do
Mm.
something impressive. But if you're trying to complete a very specific task, it's not always that easy, right?
Yeah,
You can, it can get quite frustrating there as
yeah.
well. So I think there's a certain level of expectation management if we think about professional tooling, and we
Mm.
think about the expectations that people have of professional tooling, of where generative AI can be plugged in. But again, more of the concept exploration. So sketch of diffusion being one of the examples. If people are more open to this creative exploration, that's an easier place to get started, rather than something where you need to be very factual, and you're
Mm.
expecting a very certain outcome.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
Is that I can imagine it would be very difficult to integrate it into an output that's so constrained, right? Like, and you've got this thing. It needs to be 6 meters, by 5 or whatever, and it can't be even a centimeter different than that, or else it'll fall down. Like, because you're right, they're a bit wild, they're a bit zany, they're a bit
yeah,
psychedelic, and they kind of do weird stuff. Um, but I wonder whether in future you might be able to almost like integrate them in such a way that you almost map the parameters, and then you say, all right, AI, now now this bit you can experiment with
Yeah.
within this framework that must be the case. Whether that's something that you're trying to do or will try to do in the future, like integrate it in a kind of I don't know
In a
what the
more
word is,
constrained
but
way.
yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
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 Is that even possible?
Absolutely. And I think so. If we focus on large language models for a little bit, beyond just kind of off the shelf GPT-4, for example, we see a lot of these retrieval augmented systems. So where you point your large language model to a specific source and tell it to use that as a basis um, of answering your questions. And when you start to look at then building these more broader systems, you have things like data traceability, right? So you can offer your users the ability to verify that the information is correct and have more consistent behavior. So in that sense, integrating AI with generative AI has become less about model development and it has become more about system building.
Yeah,
And UI, UX, all of that is a big part of the system building. So I think it's fair to say that AI has left the engineering department, or well, the engineering department is still very much in it, but it's expanded from the engineering department to the entire company, and that's brilliant. I'm very very happy that we're all kind of getting our hands dirty and figuring out
yeah,
how to do these things.
yeah. Because I guess eventually you want to get to a place where mid journey you can yeah, or stable diffusion or whatever DALI, you can be incredibly specific with your parameters. You could almost upload into the context window a spreadsheet of coordinates, like a point cloud of a building, and then say, okay, now go and make this amazing, right? And then
Exactly.
it'll do it. Like, is that how far away do you think we are? I mean, is that what you would want to do? And if so, like, how
Yeah.
far away are we?
There's many entry points to this, and I think this is what's exciting about it. If you think about the combination of these different AI models, where you can go from natural language of saying, hey, build me a house of these dimensions in the style of something, right? You can imagine kind of arriving at a design through natural
Yeah,
language. You can also imagine arriving at a house design from a 3D point cloud, right? Or from construction drawing. So I think in my utopia world, we'll have really a combination of these different models to support whatever pathway is the most is the right one for any specific user, to
mm.
go down that route. But if we think about off the shelf models, there tends to be a level of fine tuning. There tends to be a level of domain specificity. That means that companies like ours, yeah, you kind of have to take these models a little bit further from where they are off the shelf
Yeah,
to make them relevant for our industries.
yeah. I can imagine that you wouldn't just be able to drop mid journey into
Yeah,
AutoCAD and hope for the best. Like, I guess you probably would have to build your own, and I think it sounds to me like
yeah,
the guy I mentioned earlier, Rodrigo, sounds to me from speaking to him like a lot of the bottleneck now is in getting the talent to build your own LLMs, or get enterprises building their own
yeah,
AI models. The bottleneck is getting these PhDs out of Stanford or MIT or whatever. I mean, I don't know whether you've got a
yeah,
PhD from either of those,
yeah.
um, but that's the hard part, is the talent, right? Because every enterprise would love to build their own and put in their own kind of specific um, constraints and
Yeah. It's true there. There's certainly a spectrum of this where it is a rather small number of companies that I see training foundation models from scratch. I mean, we're talking about massive expenses, also in terms of the compute
yeah,
and data and whatnot. So if you're not ready to drop tens of millions of dollars on individual training runs, then you're not going to be doing the training all the way from scratch. But there's quite a bit available, also in terms of open source. for pre-trained models that you can then fine tune and train a little bit further to make them more specific to your industries. And that certainly involves the engineering talent to do that. And
Mm.
it's not like we've had the chance to work on these things for years now, so everybody's kind of upskilling themselves as we go along. But yeah,
Have you got any favorite models? Like, who do you think's got the edge? I mean, either open source or like off the shelf,
yeah.
commercial models.
We tend to really look at the spectrum of these things. We have partnerships, of course, with many of the big technology companies, ranging from Microsoft to AWS and NVIDIA and so forth. So of course we do look at what they offer as well.
Yeah.
But on the
So
open
you've got to
source,
be nice about everybody. Is that what
I'm
you're
going to be
saying?
nice about everybody. No, they do great work, and I think it would be premature really to bet on any specific company for all of your models at this point.
Yeah.
But I really have to give a shout out and a hat tip to companies like Hugging Face, which
Yeah.
are a massive part of making AI and these open source models accessible to the broader community. So Hugging Face, absolutely brilliant job on what they've done there, and interestingly Meta as well. If you look at a lot of these
Yeah. Yeah.
foundation models, including the segment anythings and some of the speech and text related models as well, Meta actually open sources quite a few of them. So definitely a hat tip to them as well.
Yeah. How far behind do you think open source is to like the frontier of AI?
Yeah, there's certainly there's so many different categories of these now that I don't think there's one answer, but not that behind. Not that
Yeah.
behind.
That seems to be what everyone's saying.
Yeah, exactly. And it's exciting to see, companies like Mistral as well, like
Yeah.
pop up quite well, probably not from the middle of nowhere, but pop up quite spontaneously and see a lot of great competition in this space. So I'm
Yeah.
very much betting on it.
Europeans as well. Like, oh my
Yes,
God, wow, there's a European company doing this. Okay, like,
French
yes,
are
at
also
last.
interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, it's like I wonder about the open source question because
Yeah.
obviously there's a lot in the media at the moment about
Yeah.
OpenAI. Elon Musk
Yeah.
wanted them to be open source, or did he? Who knows? But like, it might not matter, right? Like, it seems like the this idea about commercial open source, the ability to open source everything but still make money,
Yeah.
might just mean that the whole open source ecosystem just moves faster and overtakes everybody. Like, do you
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's possible,
Certainly
likely?
in some areas, especially if we think about really pushing the frontier on things like text to 3D assets or and so forth, like these more niche areas. I don't see I see the open source being in a big role in those. Of course, then there's other reasons why it might be the best call to go with, let's say, using OpenAI's models through Microsoft Azure services, and some of that is around Microsoft providing a really robust and great enterprise infrastructure with all the security and all of these things in place.
Mm,
So I
yeah,
don't think there's going to be a one right answer to this. It depends also on what level of investment in machine learning operations and DevOps you're willing to make. But I think it's very healthy that we have a spectrum of options and we can select from those.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and I do think that I mean, it gets really interesting with open source. I think when you think about the existential risk question as well. I mean, I don't know if this is a conversation you ever engage with.
Yeah,
Probably it isn't because you're working as a director of AI, so it's probably, I can imagine, maybe anathema. But when you think about the existential risk question and
yeah,
the technology getting out of control, the question of whether or not it should be open source becomes fundamental, right?
yeah,
It becomes the most important question. Should everybody have access to this technology, or should only a very few, very informed and responsible people have access to it. Like, do you have a position there? I realize this is getting probably this probably isn't on your wasn't in your brief, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, is it do you have a
Yeah,
position there?
it's an interesting one. I certainly follow the discussion on this, and it's as you've seen as well. It's constant conversations, whether it's Twitter or whether it's a World Economic Forum or the U.S. Congress. It
Yeah.
is a constant source of conversation. Um, Personally, I do believe that the ability for us to interrogate the technology and to understand the technology as a kind of broader society is a healthy one. I think it's such a nuanced answer that there's not going to be a one way to do this. And I am, as a citizen of the European Union, I'm very happy to see the EU step up with some of the regulations around things like social scoring, right? And these more nefarious ways of using AI. So remains to be seen, but I'm happy that it's being discussed. The only thing that I would love to see more of is less of fear mongering, a more kind of pragmatic, grounded discussion around this. It's a discussion that needs to be had, but
Mm.
maybe less of the fear mongering would be beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, I think a lot of the fear mongers really do believe it. Like,
Yeah,
I've spoken to a few like real doomers, they call them. I'm sure
yeah,
you're aware. And like yeah, like, and a lot of them I think make a very compelling case. Like, I'm kind of undecided. I'm very interested in this, and I have these conversations with people in AI all the time. Um, and it's weird because I still don't have a fully formed opinion
yeah,
on whether the technology is going to destroy us all. And it just feels like a weird thing to be like, oh yeah, this is all great, but there's a little chance that it might explode the world, like. And I do take that possibility seriously. Like,
yeah,
as time goes on, and as I meet more and more people doing
yeah,
different things with it, I I get less worried, and I think that's because you realize what a multivariate equation it is. It's not like there's one AGI that's going to spread over everything. There's lots of different AIs that are getting really good at specific things. Like, I mean, I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but that's certainly the way it seems to me.
yeah. No, no, I agree with that, and it's really the only way to efficiently deploy a lot of AI is to look at more of these specialized systems instead of one massive model somehow with all of the cognitive abilities of the world. But there's also the other kind of conversation, which is to what tools do these AI models have access to?
Mm,
So if you're restricting the access of the AI models to things like nuclear plants, you're probably a lot safer than
yeah,
plugging everything in all at once. So I think there's many
yeah.
layers of control that we as a society have. I really don't want to be dismissive of the concerns, and I think the discussion is very important. In the same way that I think the discussion around copyrights and the use of art, for example, for these image generation models is important. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, definitely more on the pragmatic camp in this.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because yeah, I don't want to go too far down the doomer
Yeah,
road, but I think the question, because the thing that I often come back to in that conversation is, well, how would it manifest in the real world?
yeah,
Yeah, it might be super clever, but what's it actually going to do? We have agency in the world. We're much more energy efficient, right? As agents in the real world, as humanoid
yeah,
robots. Um, we like so it's very difficult to imagine AI manifesting itself in the real world like a Terminator robot or whatever.
yeah,
Um, but but I guess it might, and actually, like the tools that you're working with, developing, understanding, they are helping AI manifest in the real world.
understand the
Like,
real world.
yeah, and I'm realizing that this is actually sounding like I'm like, are you gonna destroy the world? It's not what I'm saying, but it's like, do you kind of,
Yeah.
how far into the future do you have to think? I
Yeah.
guess. Like when you're thinking about risk,
Yeah.
are you are you worried about AI risk? Are you worried about deploying systems in the real world that you
Yeah.
could, that maintaining control over AI in the real world?
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say we are quite lucky in a sense that we don't work with people's medical records. We don't work with social scoring systems or these type of more sensitive areas where right now our focus is really on certainly connecting the physical and the digital world, but more in the context of understanding the physical world, and it kind of stops at that point so that you can action on it. But we don't have
Right.
armies of robots
Robots.
to send
Yeah.
around. So I think we're still a little bit kind of far ways away
Yeah.
from those
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
conversations.
Yeah, I thought that'd be the case. But hey, got to ask.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Great. Well, look. I mean, it's been very interesting. I mean, is there anything that you've got coming up that is especially exciting? Any launches? Like, what's happening in your world that you're
Yeah.
excited about at the moment?
Yeah, a lot of launches all around, and I think this goes to our point of a lot of specialized models, both
Okay.
for processing of construction drawings, as well as in the 3D modeling space, as well as then understanding and creating inventories of real world data and reality capture data, and yeah, at this point I'm just our team is focused on pushing those across the finish line and getting them into customers hands, and I think this is really uh where we get to the meaty part, and this is where we start to see what are the tangible impacts, and it's also where we start to get the feedback and interact with the industry on are we on the mark, or did we veer a little bit off the course. So I think ultimately the impact and the value of AI systems is defined when they're actually being in use. So that's why a big push on getting a lot of different AI features out this year, and then yeah, seeing where they go.
Awesome. All right. Well, look, Carolina, it's been super interesting. Thanks
Well,
very much for joining me.
thank you very much for having me.